back, everyone, to another edition of some washing artifacts and talking about artifacts. To give you a little context, today we're going to be looking at some artifacts, again, from the Henry Whitfield House, which is a 17th, 18th, and 19th century site in Guilford, Connecticut. And some pretty cool artifacts. And this is actually a context that's been cleaned previously, but it didn't get cleaned that well. So we're going to do it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of these artifacts, give them another wash, talk about them a little bit. Let's start with this quite pretty item right here. Remember, we're just going to use the highest of tech tools in a cheap toothbrush from Amazon, and this has a very pretty. I'll try and do some on-the-fly artifact identifications, although I'll warn you, I don't have a dictionary-ish memory for artifact styles. And historic ceramics are wildly varied. So what we're looking at here is a nice, I don't know, probably a pearlware, I guess. I'll bring that a little closer to the camera, with this very pretty transfer print blue underglazed decoration, very typical. I guess probably early 19th century if I had to take a shot in the dark, but again, that's what books are for. And this transfer print technology, you can often tell it's transfer print because the blue, and it's usually blue, although you can get transfer prints in other colors, will bleed a little bit, will kind of flow a little bit. And so we can see that here with this example. And it's under the glaze, which we can tell by sort of looking at the glaze at an angle. And it's not raised, there's no texture to it. So that's where I get that identification, probably an underglazed transfer print pearlware. And the pearlware is, you can tell the difference between that and other refined earthenwares by looking sort of closely at the glaze coloration. So I don't want to spend all day on a single artifact, so let me take a look. So this is quite cool. We've got some nice, these might take a moment to clean, so we'll go with these. And I'll use that as an opportunity to talk about ceramics a little bit, and then about the specifics of this particular ceramic. So European-made ceramics are one of the most common artifact types found on historical archaeology sites in the United States. And actually that's kind of regardless of even the ethnicity of who was living at the site. This is true even on a lot of indigenous sites, and otherwise, a lot of times these imported European ceramics are just very common. And that's certainly true at the Whitfield House. It's one of our most ubiquitous artifact types. They call them European import because, as the name suggests, most of them, there are exceptions, most of them for a long time, well into the 19th century, are probably being made in Europe, especially in England, but also France and Germany and Spain, and to a lesser extent Italy and the Netherlands. Depending on the part of the country you're in, you'll see different amounts of those. And these are being made in industrial processes in Europe and imported here to the United States, or to the colonies before it was the United States, for sale and use. And they're used for all kinds of different purposes. So this piece we're looking at right here is a piece of glazed redware, quite a large, lovely, well-preserved one. And we can see here it's glazed on the interior. Hopefully you can kind of imagine the shape. This is the base of what would have been quite a large vessel, maybe like a milking pan or something like that. And you can see the outside is unglazed. This would have been the exterior. Interior is glazed, which implies this was some sort of a utilitarian vessel. Like I was saying, maybe a milking pan. It would have been quite large, if we can imagine the circumference of this. And the glaze is meant to, make it impermeable to liquids, hold liquids. But you wouldn't glaze the outside if it's not meant to be a decorative piece. So very cool. We've got some other very likely to be from the same vessel here, based on the size and the thickness, and the glaze color is the same, and it's got the interior glaze and no glaze on the exterior. So I think there's a very strong likelihood that these are from the same vessel. They might even refit. No, maybe. That would be cool. So we call that. No, I don't think so, because this doesn't have any of the curve here, so this comes from somewhere more in the middle of the vessel. So if it was going to refit, it would be refitting something like this. And I don't think so. Not obviously anyway. It could even go something like this. I'm not sure, but that would be a thing to sort of explore. One more piece of, again, likely the same vessel. This is a little bit trickier because it doesn't have as much of the glaze preserved, although if you look closely, there is a little bit. See that little bit of glaze preserved? We can still see that. See, it's the same color. So these are still quite dirty. Like I said, just really needed another pass over with the brush. I'll come back to them later and make sure they really get nice and clean. So, again, part of that same vessel. This does have a little bit of the curve here, even though the glaze is missing there. So if this was going to refit, it would, maybe somewhere like that. Although I don't think it does like that. But those are quite cool. And then at first glance, you might look at this. This is an interesting piece, and think this is from the same vessel, but I don't think it is. This is also a glazed redware, and it has this very nicely preserved vessel form. We can see some sort of, this probably would be like this. We're looking at the top of some sort of a vessel here with this lip. And the opposite is true here. This is unglazed on the inside of the vessel and glazed on the exterior of the vessel. So some other function perhaps, or meant to be more decorative. I don't know, but some really nicely big. So these utilitarian redwares might be imported from Europe. They're a little bit more likely to be locally made in the United States or the colonies than some of the more what we call refined earthenwares that I have a few examples of here as well. But all these lovely redwares. Now, this is kind of interesting because you might think, you look at this and say, oh, that's quite similar to those other things. I'm going to go very gentle here with my brush on this, because I'm going to be honest, this probably isn't a great idea to clean this with water, but I'm going to for the purposes of, for education purposes. And this is actually glass. This is a piece of I don't know, maybe an 18th century case bottle of some sort. Again, take a look at it with our diagnostic materials. But this piece has started to, it's called devitrify, which means we're getting this discoloration around on the outside of the exterior of the glass. An even better example of a devitrifying glass is this. This is actually glass, believe it or not. It doesn't look like glass, it looks like ceramic. Whoa, my goodness. I am a terribly clumsy person, so I drop artifacts a lot. But this is similarly devitrified. You can really see the devitrification. It gets this almost rainbow, quite pretty effect, but that's actually the artifact coming into contact with oxygen for the first time in maybe hundreds of years, and the oxygen has an effect on the glass that the glass doesn't really like it. So we call that devitrification, as in like the breakdown of the glass itself. Nice pieces. I know I just dropped this, but I promise these are actually these glasses are quite thick, these old glasses. Quite sturdy, frankly. Let's do one more piece of glass. Another interesting little surprising piece that I think has a little secret in itself for it. So here we have another little piece of green, quite older glass. Doesn't look like a whole lot, but the shape of this is quite telling. We have here is part of the neck and mouth of a bottle. We can see the bottle here. Just the lip of it sort of just appearing, and we have the top here. So you have to start to imagine when you're trying to do artifact identification, especially in historical sites where you have such a variety of artifacts, you have to start to think really three-dimensionally about these objects, this material culture, and trying to think about what would the larger artifact have looked like. And you get an eye for it with time, with quite a bit of time and experience, and that eye is always getting better. To be totally honest, I always more to learn. We also have some of our shell here. This site is really dominated by these. This actually has been quite nicely cleaned. I don't need to do anything really with this, but lovely marine resources that were probably an important part of diet at the site well into the 19th century, I suspect. So, quahog and oyster. Again, this has been cleaned pretty well. Usually shell. You can see how delicate that is. You can actually see some of that speckle off, right? So, to be quite careful with these. They're quite delicate. You see how nice and large these are. They're quite large compared to, and then some soft shell clam as well. This actually is probably also a piece of oyster, but we get a lot of soft shell clam at this site as well. I don't look like I have an example of that from this context, but that's our three dominant types, and we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of those. What else do we have here to look at? Let's continue since we were talking about redware already, let's talk about one more type of redware, and we can look at this in comparison to some of our other redwares here. So if I was going to ID this in our catalog, I would call this a Jackfield-type redware. It's probably not a true Jackfield. Jackfield is actually you can see that's so shiny you can actually see the reflection of the of my light sources here, which is kind of cool. Doing this on a photo board, and I have some nice LED lights here that are very bright, but that's so reflective, right? That glaze is quite beautiful. And this is a redware, very similar in construction and technology to these, but Jackfield types are probably not for utilitarian purposes. They're meant to be used as tableware, like our refined earthenwares that we see elsewhere. Now, true Jackfield has an almost purple body. It's very rare. I've only seen it on a few sites. So that's why I would say I probably would type this as a Jackfield type, because that body is more of a brown kind of a color than a purple. I mean, it's bright, really pops bright purple on true Jackfield. So if we put that side by side here with our other redwares, some of our glasses, right? So some of these artifacts, like, I don't know, they don't look like a lot to an untrained eye, but there's a lot of information in these, a lot of dating. All right, we've got a handful of interesting earthenwares to look at. Some of these similar to what we looked at last time. This one actually might even have an almost very similar motif to a piece we looked at the last time we were doing this together. That lovely green, again an underglaze, but this is probably hand painted as opposed to transfer printed, I think. Get that nice and clean. Very lovely. And just some really interesting, here's some unusual colors. I'll say that with these sort of, whether they're whitewares or pearlwares or whatever they are, you can figure that out later. These refined earthenwares, which were definitely meant to be tablewares, plates and tea vessels and that sort of thing. They tend to have a kind of a muted color palette. Lots of blue, transfer prints, but in lots of different patterns. And these are interesting. These are some fun colors. This quite almost forest green color. This quite bright blue is very different from the typical blue that we see here. I guess that's probably slipped on there as opposed to transfer printed. But really not your typical color for these. And again, an even less typical color, this quite pretty pink color. These are quite rare. This is very delicate, maybe this might be from a teacup or a teacup saucer or something like that. Trying to get as much of that dirt off of there as we can, so when we're doing our IDs and the next stage of the process, we can really get a good look at that paste, that body, that cross section, which can give us some information, obviously. But again, really an unusual color, this pink color. Very pretty, very, very different from what we typically get. And the last piece I have here today doesn't have any interesting color on it, but it does have an interesting form and shape that might get us thinking a little bit three-dimensionally about our ceramics. And I'm not even going to pretend to know exactly what this is. Some kind of a, again, maybe the plate that would go under a teacup or something like that. Some sort of tableware. But we can see here in this shape, you can see that. You can see the curve. So this is a base of something that would sit like this, come around like this. Start thinking about this three-dimensionally. And a lot of the glaze has been broken off here, and we don't have a true edge, but we're close to it. I don't know where the edge would be, somewhere up here. But undecorated. Almost looks more like a creamware to me. Is a little bit earlier. Might be a bit earlier. It seems like a pretty intact context to me. These artifacts all strike me as quite 19th century-ish. One of our later contacts at the site. Yeah. There we have it. Some more of our typical artifacts from this site. Again, maybe I'll continue doing these. The first one of these I did, people seem to really enjoy. They're, I think, maybe a bit relaxing and very chill. And I'll keep doing these, and as I do future ones, I will try and pick out some different classes of artifacts, and maybe every time we can think about them in slightly different ways. Today we got a little bit of a workshop in these glazed redwares and how various they are, right? So several different types here. Internally glazed, very robust redware for the purposes, some kind of functional purpose. Again, quite robust, but this one with a glaze on the outside. And maybe, again, I think steel probably for practical usage. And then this quite different looking Jackfield-type dark glaze, very reflective, which I think probably was used more as a tableware. And then an interesting variety of the different sorts of colors that we find on these 18th and 19th century refined earthenwares. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for hanging out.